fantastic.
Oh, mate, I didn't know that.
The Morrison government's dropped the ball at every stage.
A strong coalition government that's running a strong economy.
But they got Mr Morrison, the bloke who just keeps dropping the ball.
They are playing politics with the Pacific.
Mr Morrison doesn't like to listen, and he certainly doesn't like to act.
Another great linkage.
I think a really good thing for the people of the Pacific.
For all the voter exasperation about gotcha moments and the focus on gaffes, election campaigns are all about establishing a dominant message on the day, on putting your opponents on the back foot. Week 3 has seen a decisive shift in the election campaign.
Jobs, jobs and jobs. A strong economy means a stronger future.
We had 2 weeks in which the dominant line was, if you don't understand the economy, how can you possibly know how to run it? That is, the coalition's line. But now it's all about the government dropping the ball, about the Prime Minister going missing, and the perpetual references to holding a hose.
This is a hose you have to hold, put it bluntly. This needs time and attention. You cannot abdicate or step away from responsibility.
The wild card in this campaign has been the Solomon Islands security deal with China. For a government that likes to spruik its defence and national security credentials, that has spent a lot of the campaign at defence facilities, and which has been dialling up its anti-Chinese rhetoric, the Solomons deal has put a big question mark over its credentials.
What happens if the red line you've drawn in Solomon Islands is breached? Are we talking military action? What sort of response would you have?
Well, it would not be responsible for me to be speculating in public about what Australia, the United States and others would be doing in circumstances such as that. That would not be a responsible thing to do.
This from a Prime Minister who on the weekend said that Chinese bases in our region would be a red line for both Australia and the United States. The government's stepped up rhetoric on the Solomons, including Defence Minister Peter Dutton's Anzac Day warning that we had to prepare for war, set the scene for the opposition to spell out some detailed policies about the Pacific today.
Australians understand this is a time of risk. They understand it's a time of uncertainty, and they want a government that does the work to keep them safe.
Labor unveiled a package of measures that includes a defence school for members of Pacific Island Defence and Security Forces, a doubling of the Maritime Security Program to deal with illegal fishing, more funding for the ABC to broadcast into the region, and a $525 million increase in development assistance. Labor is also promising support for Pacific climate change projects and, significantly, an overhaul of Pacific labour schemes which would ease workforce shortages here. The government was dismissive.
What they're effectively saying is they're going to keep doing what we've been doing. There's one difference though. I sent in the AFP. The Labor Party wants to send in the ABC when it comes to their Pacific solution.
But the government's credentials will be under pressure on other fronts this week. Tomorrow, the Bureau of Statistics will release the quarterly inflation numbers. With prices rising on everything from fuel to food and housing, the Reserve Bank has signalled the need to raise interest rates as inflation lifts beyond its 2 to 3% target range. If the number is big enough, the speculation will be intense between now and next Tuesday's RBA board meeting about the prospect of interest rates rising as early as next week. That's a whole week of election campaign speculation, even if rates ultimately don't rise. And then there is the question of the government's commitment to net zero emissions by 2050.
We have committed to a pathway to 2050, okay? We have committed.
Zero net carbon emissions by 2050. Morrison's document is a flexible plan. It leaves us wiggle room as we proceed into the future.
Yeah, well, the net zero thing is all sort of dead anyway. I mean, Boris Johnson's said he's pausing the net zero commitment. Germany's building coal and gas infrastructure. Italy's reopening coal-fired power plants. It's all over.
The Nationals candidate for the Queensland coal seat of Flynn, Colin Boyce, opened up the question of the Coalition's commitment to net zero emissions by 2050 yesterday with his suggestion that there was, quote, wiggle room in the commitment.
What our candidate in Flynn was talking about is how we get there. He wasn't talking about the commitment himself, and he's clarified that today. Our commitment to net zero by 2050 is a commitment of the Australian government that I made in Glasgow. It is the government's absolute policy.
But the impact of this is that the Coalition appears to be saying one thing in the bush and another in the cities. The political crime the Coalition accused Labor of at the last election. Liberal candidates facing independents in the so-called teal seats in the cities don't seem to have been told there is wiggle room in the policy. Trent Zimmerman, who is under threat in North Sydney, said it was a, quote, binding commitment which the government should and will honour. Dave Sharma told his local paper in the electorate of Wentworth that he had personally, quote, delivered a binding agreement to net zero emissions by 2050 and an upgraded 2030 emissions reduction target. Barnaby Joyce is a problem for the coalition in these seats, with independents arguing that a vote for the Liberal candidate is a vote for Joyce.
Labor would govern with the Greens, and it will be Greens that will be pulling Labor's strings. They'll certainly never be pulling my strings, ever. The garlic, where's that coming
from? But the PM's headache now is the opposite. Labor and others are casting the Liberal Party as a hostage to a minor party which has clearly been pulling the climate policy strings.
They look fantastic.
Both the News Poll and Ipsos polls published in the last 24 hours show no significant change in the major party standing since the beginning of the campaign, meaning Labor remains in front, despite all the escalating rhetoric, despite the missteps.
This is going to take us like half an hour to ring this up, mate.
It's not a good time for a government's record to be coming under question.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 730's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.